Okay, we're recording. If you don't want your face on the recording, just black your face out. I don't care. All right, so we were supposed to read 2 articles for today. I got most of the reading responses turned in. Some of you didn't turn them in, and given that this is a completely new structure and they were normally due at like 10 p.m., if you still want to turn them in, I will totally give you credit. Most of you got them turned in, but if you didn't and you want to just get those points, it's 10 points still, just like before. Go ahead and do that. I'm not going to penalize anybody for being late because this is literally the apocalypse and we're not playing that way. So if you didn't get it turned in, feel free to do that anytime today or tomorrow, and I'll still give you credit. So that's what we were supposed to read for today. I'm going to talk a little bit about some announcements first. So I know, Marissa, you noticed that there were new discussion forums. I replied to you last night. I'll check these every night while I'm laying in bed. So if you guys have questions about class, there is a discussion forum for that. And Marissa had asked about exams, which we're going to talk about in a second. And then I created one just for all of the chaos, just because we're all going through this incredibly bizarre time. And I want there to be an outlet in class for you to commiserate with your fellow classmates and students and with me, because this is bananas. I never in my life thought I would experience anything like this. So if you want to log on and post your frustrations, things that you're struggling with, I know it sounds really cheesy. I know it sounds really dumb, but if you can't be with each other in person, it really does help. To log on and complain about things that are frustrating or questions that you have about any pieces of anything related to what's going on now. So I put that there. Marissa logged on and said some things, and then I replied with my own concerns too. So that's what that one is for. But I'll log on and check those every night too. So again, if you're frustrated, get it out. And I know it's hard because you can't see each other to complain in the library together or to complain at the bar together. So that's why I created that there for you. The last one is podcast thoughts. So if you've looked at the schedule, you probably noticed that I'm going to have a couple of podcasts and then one documentary assigned. So that's where you're going to post thoughts about that. The reason I'm doing this is, like, to be perfectly honest with you, some of you might get sick. I might get sick, right? So, I mean, we don't know. We have no idea. But I have that, if you can't log on, if you're sick or have a headache or you're just done, right? If you're just absolutely done, you can still get participation points by logging on and posting podcast thoughts there, okay? So what I did in the schedule, and I'll show you that in a second, is I've got, I think once a week from here on out, I've got like a video or a podcast for you to digest, and then you can log on and just post your podcast thoughts there, or you can log on with me. I'll be here live to chat with you about the podcast. So if you don't like writing isn't your thing, or you didn't get it turned in, or you'd just rather have somebody to look at and talk to and see what new Foo Fighter shirt she's wearing for the day, just log on and we'll just talk about it and I'll give you points that way. I just want to create multiple modalities, multiple ways for you guys to stay engaged. If you just want to do podcast thoughts, done, fine. Or you can log on and we can chat about the podcast or the documentary. Deal? Any questions about the discussion forums? Okay. So the next announcement is the syllabus changes. Exams are over. We are done. We are not having any more exams. It is over. Yeah, like, woo! So I took those points out. Essentially what this means is if we were to have had a second exam, you would have all gotten 100%, because I decided to just give you 100 free pandemic points because this is insane. So it's not necessarily that it's canceled in the sense that you don't have to take it, but everybody's getting 100 on that exam. And those are just free points that I'm giving absolutely everybody. I also, you only have to do one book review. I'm sorry if you've read all of them or if you've read more than one, but hopefully they were at least interesting to read. If you want to try to sell them on Amazon and get your money back, you can. I had no idea this was going to happen today or this semester, so I'm sorry that you bought all of these books, but I'm only going to require that you do one book review instead of writing up all 4 of them. So hopefully you haven't finished that entire paper. If you have, you could just quit the class and I'll give you an A and you can just be done with us. But I think that it's too much this semester, and so I'm just canceling the 3 of them. So you just have to do one. So if you've done one, perfect. FKA, by the way, stands for formerly known as. It's not a synthesis anymore because it's only one book. You're not synthesizing more than one thing. So it's just a book review at this point. And so I put specific instructions for those in the syllabus. So you should be able to see that. I highlighted all the changes to the syllabus in like bright pink, so you should be able to see them. Questions about the book review or anything, and then that exam's canceled. Congrats on your 100%. You got an A+ on an exam. Proud of you guys. Oh, Ashley's got it to work. Good. Yay. Research groups. So I gave more specific instructions to those of you who are doing research in the syllabus, and I pared down, I cut back on what you're required to turn in. I'm still figuring out what it is that I want the groups to do. I know that you have the capability, like Anthony and Kate, I know that you're connected, and I know that like Chaz is connected with a couple of other people who are doing the pimp hunting or who have done the pimp hunting. But I think what's going to happen is, I don't know if you noticed in the syllabus, if you've looked at it, but the last week, I've got basically just us meeting and figuring out what we're turning in for that. So stay tuned, research groups, stay tuned. If you're working alone, continue working alone. But keep an eye on the calendar and the announcements, because we'll be meeting as groups. I'll check in with you and we'll schedule a Zoom meeting and we'll talk about what it is that you have to turn in. If you have questions, just put them in the chat. So here's the schedule. So for today, you were supposed to read Gerassi and Jonsson. You did have a reading response due yesterday at noon, but again, if you want to turn that in, go for it. I'll still give you points. And then we're gonna do, and normally I won't do this. I won't normally do online Zoom lectures back to back, but I wanna keep momentum going, and I'm worried. I'm like, my biggest fear right now, you guys, is that in a week, there's like 2 of you logged on. I'm like, I lost them. Where did they go? Like, I am paranoid about that. So I'm thrilled that there's 29 of you here today. So I wanna do another lecture on Tuesday, and it's gonna be on the Brent's article. And that reading response will be due on Monday at noon. And I liked being able to have enough time yesterday to look through those and see what questions you had. You guys did a really good job of understanding these 2 articles. So if you can just have that done by Monday at noon, I'll look at them before we meet again on Tuesday. And that'll be the only time that we'll do back-to-back lectures, I believe. Because after that, next Thursday, you'll listen to a podcast, and then you can either, you don't have to do both, you can if you want, you can either post in podcast thoughts or hop online. I'll be here with another Foo Fighters shirt on, or maybe a Halloween costume, depending on what Anthony tells me. And so it's whichever you choose to do is fine. And all of these points for like logging on and being present and being engaged, those are all still being folded into your professionalism points, your participation and all of that stuff. There's no separate points that have been added for this, but it's just to keep us all engaged. Yes, the optional Zoom meetings are during class time. Yep, we'll still do it at 8. Although I'm thinking that we won't use the entire 75 minutes. So we'll see how long we go today. And I think we'll be able to start at the earliest at like 8:30, maybe 9. Class goes till 9:40, no, 9:15. Yeah, so 8:30 should be enough time. But let's just see how long we go today, and then I'll say, I'll announce what time we'll meet. Same thing, then we'll have a lecture on the 7th, and a reading response due the day before, and then a podcast, and then a documentary later in April. And then I'm still working on the rest of the syllabus for the rest of April. Any other questions about the syllabus or what's recommended or required? All right, perfecto.
I got a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, how does this thing work? Like, how do I see everybody?
Oh, how come we could see you a minute ago? What happened?
Oh, I don't know.
What? Now your computer's all fuzzy, or your face is all fuzzy.
Let
Let me
What
check
can
you.
you see, John?
Did I? How?
No, what can you see, like on your computer or phone?
Oh, I just see the PowerPoint and Dr. Henderson. That's it.
Can you guys see each other?
I minimized the videos so I just I don't see anyone. I just see the PowerPoint.
So there's this thing, a button up here on the right-hand side that says speaker view. So right now, Marissa is the only person in my screen. But if you go to gallery view, you should be able to see everybody. If you click gallery view. Let me share that screen with you. I'll show you. See right here?
Oh yeah.
Gotcha.
There's Marissa. There's everybody. Did it work?
No, I'm still. Oh, hide my video in gallery view.
Do you want, yeah, weird.
I will play with this. I'll figure it out.
Okay, yeah. All right, let me unshare that screen. Back to the PowerPoint. All right. So here's what we're gonna do today. The recording to this Zoom, Rachel, I don't know yet. I have to, I think, download it and then upload it to YouTube. But there will be a link. I'll post a link on Canvas for everybody. It might be on my YouTube channel. Which, by the way, I didn't realize this, but I had a bunch of old family videos on my YouTube channel. So if you got to enjoy those, I was waiting for a snarky comment from Anthony because there's some stuff from when I was like in middle school that I logged on this morning and I immediately made private. I'm like, oh my God, Anthony's going to see this and I'm never going to hear the end of it, but it's gone. It's gone, Anthony. So I'm sorry.
I really appreciate how much you think like background work I do.
I'm glad. All right, folks, so here's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna talk about these two articles. We're gonna try to simulate what we do normally in class, which is talk about the sample, method, findings, themes, and critiques. I'm gonna put you in breakout rooms. So I hope that this works. What happens is it'll automatically put you in breakout rooms. So I don't know who's going in which room. And you'll be in small groups of probably, I don't know, 5, I would imagine, maybe 6. And you'll talk about it with each other. And then I get to put like a countdown timer, like 1 minute left. And then it'll be flashing on your screen, 1 minute left. And then you all get put back into the main room. So this will be an interesting experiment in technology this morning. And we're gonna talk about the things we normally do, and then we're going to talk about academic and applied sociology, which we've talked about earlier in class, but I'll remind you what all of that is as we go through these two articles. So here we go. This is what you're supposed to be doing in your breakout rooms. Please, in the chat, hopefully you still have access to the chat, you're able to let me know if there's any problems in your breakout rooms. Again, I've never done this before, so it's going to be an adventure. But think about these things we normally think about: method, sample, findings, critique, and then also which theories you think could be used to describe the sex trading identities article, not the police corruption one, but definitely the Gerassi one. And then what's important about this article. So for both of them, for the police one and for the Gerassi article. We'll start with Gerassi. One of you, I think it would make sense for one of you to take notes and then be the person who reports back to the group, as opposed to all of you trying to do it at once. So just designate a leader when you get into your groups. Are you ready? Ooh. Here we go. Sorry, I have to mess with the settings. All right. John, I can see you again.
All right. Yeah, I think I fixed it.
Okay.
What? She's such a cuddler. At 95 pounds.
Yeah, our black lab is like 100 pounds. Oof. All he wants to do is lay on me.
She's barely a year old.
That's a big puppy.
Mm-hmm.
Back.
Oh,
Oh my gosh, John, you're all...
Yeah, I fixed
I think, is everybody back?
Dr. Henderson, were we supposed to talk about both articles or just Gerassi?
Really Gerassi for the most part.
oops.
Oh, can you guys mute? Echoing. There we go. All right. Was that enough time? Was 5 minutes enough time? I'm not seeing this. So yeah, it's okay. Okay. So since we don't have a whiteboard, which by the way, y'all, I had my husband install a whiteboard, check this out. But the camera won't work. Like I can't detach it from my thing and like go and like, I'm gonna have Betty White hold it up for me while I'm walking around. So like, it was a waste of time, but since we don't have a whiteboard, I'm just gonna type in the PowerPoint. Can you all still see the PowerPoint presentation? Okay, so for the Gerassi article, hopefully you all picked a leader to report back, but we'll just go with whoever wants to go first. What was the method that they used in this article?
I can jump in. So they, for the Gerassi article, used qualitative interviews with both people in the commercial sex trade or that had been in it, and service providers within the social work and provision side of it as well. Yeah, so they just did in-depth, semi-structured. So they had questions, but they allowed for them to talk about whatever kind of came up.
Right, perfect. And so the sample, I think we mentioned that. And then the findings, what were the overall findings and what was important? I mean, that's the one thing that I really want us to talk about with this article in particular. Why was it important and what are the basic findings?
One of them was that there was like a multitude of like perspectives from the women that they interviewed. Like they saw themselves as, I think they said, three main, they described themselves in like three main ways.
Mm-hmm. And was a sex trafficking victim one of those ways? No, not at all. Mm-hmm. And not even really sex worker. They didn't like that language either. So that's interesting. It's a really interesting finding because the title of my class is, you know, Sociology of Sex Trafficking and Sex Work. And that's not the language that folks, at least in this sample, which is one place, one time, and one specific group of folks, they're not even using the language that I'm using to teach the class. So that's one of the most interesting things I think I wanted you all to take away. So what's the critique of this article? A lot of you had some critiques in your reading responses.
I'll go ahead and, so some critiques that I had reading it were that they only interviewed 50 people altogether, so they had a pretty small sample.
I think it was 30, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like 30 women that were or had been in the sex trade, and then like 20 service providers. And they all, like, they were sort of basing it out of one specific town. So one of the things that they mentioned also in the article as a limitation is that they didn't have very many perspectives from some races. I think everybody in the study was either white, black, or like biracial.
And
yeah.
all female.
And all female, yeah.
Which is another limitation for sure. Yeah, good. So if we had to pick a theory to describe this article, what theory or theories could we use, given the overall findings and the overall themes?
In our group, we talked about life course theory being super applicable because the way that they identify might change as they discover more things about their situation and what happened and whatever. Like Marissa mentioned, like the woman that didn't identify as a prostitute at all, but said multiple times, like, yeah, I go and people pay me for sex, but like, and I do it because I need the money, but I'm not a prostitute. And so like those things. So yeah.
Look at the baby. So cute. Oh, sorry, Ellie. I was listening. I heard you. All right, so life course theory, good, excellent. I saw that immediately when I first read this article a while ago. Any others? Did you see any others? That's fine, because I've got some.
I was like, we talked about intersectionality.
There we go. Okay. We need intersectionality, or would you talk about?
Just that it's a lot of people obviously have different experiences,
yeah.
And that could be because of socioeconomic status, race. I mean, they only interviewed women, so, but just how like you can see that also affected their access to healthcare and to resources, and like it's not only how they see each other, how they see themselves, but it's also like what they have. So.
Yep, I think intersectionality works good. And I think that's really, if I had to pick the reason behind why Gerassi wrote this article, I'm pretty sure it's because she wanted to point out like this, we're doing this wrong. We should not say, are you being trafficked? We should look at this from a completely different lens, which is very intersectional. So what's important? Why do we care? Why do we even care about this article?
Something, I wasn't the delegate for our group, but something that I found important, and maybe not necessarily, I didn't think of it as like a critique because it's not really a critique in how the like article was written or produced, but it was like, it said in the end, like one of the findings was that the providers didn't necessarily align with like the women or individuals. I'm trying to find the quote.
Trauma.
Providers had, quote, various conceptualizations of women's identities, unquote, and they didn't all align with the women's own sense of themselves. So something that I think is important about that is that how are these individuals supposed to receive resources from these providers if the providers don't like see them, if we're not all on the same page, I guess is like what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and not on the same page. And a lot of you in your reading responses mentioned trauma. And we've talked all semester about how important being trauma informed is. Did you get the sense that these service providers were really connecting with the ladies? And I know that wasn't really a research question, but there was definitely something in there about trauma that quite a few of you critiqued from the service provider perspective.
I think one thing I commented on mine was just how there was definitely a misalignment in how the providers viewed the participants' like individual identities. So I think they might not have really understood how they could like not identify as a victim, or like how the trauma may have shaped like their identity or how they saw them, and that definitely caused like an issue in the provision of services for these women.
For sure. And they didn't really, according to the authors, the service providers didn't really, they just assumed that everybody had experienced trauma during their time in the commercial sex trade, which I think folks the authors, it sounded like anyway, found issue with that. And that's not to say that they're not trauma informed, just that maybe they're a little uninformed in general, right? And I know there was also one provider, there's a quote in the article that talked about how she went back with her client, not her client, that's a bad word, but I guess this person involved in the commercial sex trade, and talked about former childhood trauma and how that could potentially be related to the trauma or their experiences in the commercial sex trade. So I think for me, what's important about this article is that service providers need to be survivor informed, right? I mean, there was no indication to me at all that any of the people who were giving direct services were survivors or had a survivor on their board, on their staff, or anything. And you can avoid a lot of that if you just frankly listen to the person that you're trying to help, right? Include that person in an official capacity, right?
That reminds me of Megan and, or not Megan, sorry. Shoot.
Ruth, Epic.
I saw their presentation at the symposium. She came and sat in class with us. She works.
Jamie. Jamie.
Yeah. They did like a quiz thing where you would but they talked about how to be like survivor informed and like how it's really easy to get stuck in your perspective. And so yeah, that just reminds me of how you need to definitely be survivor informed.
Mm-hmm. And really from a broader perspective, we should do that with anything in society. Like if we're, for instance, maybe making decisions about healthcare on a national level, maybe you should include people who are, healthcare experts and know what they're doing, right? And, it goes with a lot of different social institutions. Any other thoughts that you guys came up with in your groups, your breakout rooms that you wanted to share?
I was just gonna say that on top of having survivor informed people on staff, I also think there should be a wide variety too of different identities within those survivors that can bring their perspectives so they can kind of sorry, I'm really bad at trying to explain what I'm saying, but
Fine.
Just as a way to stand up and help more people throughout their specific experiences, intersectionality within the survivors that are helping.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not just women, not just white women, but people from all walks of life. So take an intersectional perspective. Yeah, absolutely. That's important. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the method that they use because I found it absolutely fascinating. And Megan and I have talked about this at length and how important it is when you're dealing with somebody who may or may not know that they have trauma or they've got complex trauma. They often will talk in circles. So you can't really understand. And the stories that they tell, and this happened to me over and over in my interviews, where the stories that they would tell would be circular instead of linear. And they would come back to points and you're like, wait a minute, are you talking about when you were 18 or when you were 12? So I really think it's interesting. One of the takeaways I want you guys to learn from this article, because it's the only one that we're reading for this class that uses this method, the life calendar method, is super interesting. If you're reading or have read The Diary of Jasmine Grace, literally the premise of the entire book, it's her diary from when she was being exploited, which is so interesting and incredibly valuable. When I talked to her on the phone, I'm like, I cannot believe you kept your journal, that you even had one, because going back to have a linear record of day by day by day. And in fact, I would encourage all of you to be journaling now, honestly, because this is a time we're going to look back on, when we're grandparents or when we're just, 20, 30 years from now and go, how did we deal with that? What feelings were going through my mind? What was I experiencing? Did I find toilet paper when I was looking for it? All of these bizarre things that we can't really stop and think about right now, because there is trauma involved in what we're all going through right now. There's quite a bit of it, actually. Yeah, Cleo, you should start journal writing again. Definitely. I have at the end of every day, I like check my Canvas announcements and make sure everything's fine. And then I just write like basic things about what we did to make it through the day. Like me and my kids and my husband. How did we stay sane? So to have that methodology, I think it was really timely to have it for this first class period when we're all experiencing some really weird stuff. And it helps you go through with somebody who's experienced trauma. It helps you go through, okay, well, do you remember your 18th birthday? Or do you remember when you first got your driver's license, right? And thinking about how that can help you contextualize and remember certain things, because the way that the way that your memory stores trauma is really different from how it stores every other memory that you have. I have PTSD, and it blows my mind like how little I can remember about like just short-term memory stuff. I forget things. I know sometimes you've raised your hands in class, be like, can we do this? Can you send out an example of what the book synthesis looks like? And I'm like, yep, you're gonna have to email me, because my brain, because I have PTSD, I cannot remember it. So this method I think is super interesting and super important for us as a takeaway, and super timely for what we're talking about and experiencing right now. I would recommend, if moving forward, if you go into service provision, or if you do direct services with anybody, or if you're trying to get a story out of somebody, try this method, because it's not just for researchers. Like John's going into law enforcement, you potentially could use this life calendar method where you walk people through certain time periods. If you're going into direct service provision, or if you're working on your Social 400 project, like this is a really interesting, important way to deal with folks who need a little bit extra help telling their story. Any questions about that? Sweet. I had all this stuff just in case discussion was terrible or only 4 of you logged in. So we don't need to go through these. It was just an insurance policy. We talked about this, critiques, we talked about that. And we also talked, look at this. It's like you could read my mind. You know exactly which theories I thought were gonna be in there. I love it. So what's applicable here? This is the piece that I love. I love talking about the application of this. Who should read this article?
I think service providers should definitely be reading the article.
Right. And knowing that service providers don't typically have access to journal articles, although JSTOR has everything open and available for everybody now, just for this weird time frame that we're in. How could we translate this into something that's easily digestible? Here's a hint. An infographic, y'all, is a really important tool for you to learn. In my theory class, which starts at 9:30 this morning, I'm allowing my students to either write a paper, do an infographic, or just do a presentation of their final project. And an infographic, we see these all the time. You're seeing them constantly, especially now, about what's going on. It's an easy and colorful and visually pleasing way to present data. And if you shared it with service providers via email or in a newsletter or on social media, that's one way to get them reading this sort of academic piece. And I swear to God, in any job that you have, you'll need academic literature. You probably, unfortunately, won't have access to it to make what you're doing in your job better. But an infographic is a way to take that academic literature, and you all will have these tools at the end of this class. You all will know exactly what to pick out of a journal article and translate for an application for an office or for workers, employees. So you have those tools. And if you like graphic design, I would highly recommend messing around with infographics and creating infographics, because it's a really interesting and important way to get this information out into the public and not just in the ivory tower. You all know what an infographic is, right? Yes. Okay, good. All right, whoop. So let's talk about the police corruption article. How many of you in your groups, raise your hand, I guess, if you you had the opportunity to talk about the police corruption article? You had enough time? No? Was 5 minutes not enough time? No? You want 7?
5 minutes was enough time for like one article to go through with all the things, but we like had 30 seconds to talk about the corruption one. So.
Okay. I figured, and it sucked because I put the time stamp on it when I created the groups. I'm like, wait a minute, maybe that wasn't enough time. So I went back to try to change it and it wouldn't let me do it. So I'm learning. So the police corruption article, there was a lot of high level language used, and it was a little bit dense, but by looking at your reading responses, I could tell that a lot of you got it, which was amazing. Super proud. So the 3 theoretical propositions, and I'll just go over these since you didn't have enough time to talk about them. The 3 things, that the case that they're trying to make in this article, I think was pretty clear in the intro and in the lit review, that corruption of police increases the profitability of human trafficking in source countries. So a source country is a country where people are being trafficked from. It's bizarre to think about that in the United States because the vast majority of sex trafficking victims in the United States are from the United States. But in Europe, they're coming from the Ukraine or Lithuania or Nigeria through Italy and Greece and up into Western Europe. So that's what a source country is. So the corruption of the police actually increases the profitability here. It also lowers recruitment costs for traffickers. It makes it easier for traffickers to continue recruiting and building their network of victims. And it also creates distrust among victims as well, right? So if victims don't trust law enforcement, which makes sense if you feel like you're going to get arrested for committing a crime of prostitution or whatever crime is on the books in that jurisdiction, of course you're not going to trust cops. People don't trust cops in general, so it's just exacerbated for victims. So these are the 3 propositions. And the really cool thing about this article is this is a new method of analyzing data. Does anybody want to hop in and talk about how they got data to prove whether or not these propositions were true? Does anybody want to pop in? I noticed a couple of you in your reading responses got it and figured it out, but who wants to say? What do they do, Marissa?
So they did a bivariate analysis, which we just learned in Bales's research class. But they did like a bivariate analysis of like the different variables to see like how statistically like significant they were in terms of whether it like increased or decreased or whatever. So I thought that was pretty cool. It was like the first time in a research article that I've actually been able to like kind of understand the table and be able to minimally be able to understand the numbers that they're saying.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. I thought about the method students when I was reviewing this article a couple of days ago. I'm like, oh, I wonder if they've learned this stuff yet. I hope so. Otherwise, we're gonna be like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, the last thing we learned before the apocalypse hit.
The apocalypse, yeah. So the cool thing about where they got the data from, I'm gonna skip ahead really quick. So they made a data set based on other data sets. This is the really cool piece. So they pulled data from the UNODC, which is the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, and they categorized that data from different reports, and they coded countries based on the frequency of reporting from these origin countries. They also used the International Crime Victim Survey and the Executive Opinion Survey gathered by the World Economic Forum to measure perceived reliability of the police. So they took all of these massive data sets and pulled variables from them. And I just started analyzing data this way in Europe because it's one of the only ways you can get data from Europe and really analyze things on a macro level. And that's how they created their data set, which I think is really interesting. And then they ran those statistical analysis tests that Marissa was talking about between the variables that they pulled by country. So it's a really interesting way of thinking about data. I'm gonna go back one. So these are the claims that they were trying to set out and prove that high-level police officers have absolutely in the past provided protection to brothel owners. So this corruption piece that's really helping bolster sex trafficking operations. So in exchange for bribes, and they found evidence of this in the literature in India, Greece, Ukraine, and Bulgaria, not terribly surprising. Police have also been known to leak information to obstruct investigations. I noticed that, and Marissa, in your reading response, you talked about the Fort Collins police. And it was interesting because I shared that with my friend who's an officer up there, and he was laughing and he said that you deserve an A+.
Amanda sent it to me and I was like, wow, I feel
You're on the map.
I'm proud. And I was like, okay, extra credit. Just kidding. But
we absolutely, during one of our last ops, had a lieutenant in the room who was absolutely texting people as the op was going on. And I'm like, interesting. I wonder who he's texting and who he's telling about what's going on behind the scenes here.
Just like interesting to me because like, you'd like to think that like police aren't corrupt and stuff, but it got me thinking about how like even corruption is like, you really have to like there has to be like intent to be corrupt. Like I don't think you're like accidentally corrupt. Like, I feel like pretty well a police officer knows if he's like corrupt or not. But I think how like the level of ignorance is where it's not necessarily purposeful. But that just reminded me of the guy because he was like, oh, don't listen, blah, 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 blah. But like if traffickers know that Fort Collins PD mainly does not believe in it, then they're gonna like be like, oh, we don't have to worry about the police. Like the level of ignorance, like not
willful ignorance.
Yeah, like willful ignorance doesn't like how much that plays into it. Like I feel like corruption's like, I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily go as far to say as that guy is corrupt. I mean, for this instance, but but it's just like the level of ignorance like that. I can definitely see like how if a trafficker knows that the police like aren't going to take it seriously, then I'm sure that they don't have to worry about it as much.
Mm-hmm. So how do we fix this?
I would say we need to have like hire better law enforcement to begin with. I think that's like, I mean, I've talked about this in a lot of criminal justice classes. Like there needs to be a lot more training, I think, and I guess I think there just needs to be more like kind of like a stricter like hiring process and things that they have to go through. I don't know. I just feel like it kind of boils down to like training almost in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of it stems from education too, because like I mean the hiring process of a police officer, I mean it's actually pretty like intense. It takes like up to like 2 years, like 18 months to 2 years, because you have to do like a lot of different like physical agility tests and stuff, but you don't need a degree to be a police officer. And you like once you're hired, or like you like might go to the academy before you apply to be a police officer, but like more times than not like they'll put you through the academy, but there's not really like scholarly education that happens there. It's more like how to become a police officer. But I think if there needs to be more like academic backgrounds in police officers,
more collaboration with academics, instead of kicking them out.
Yeah, cause like one time, so my old coworker, his dad was like a Loveland PD officer. He still is, and my coworker was enlisting in the Navy, and I went to his like going away party, and his dad was like, oh, you're a criminal justice major, and he was like, do you want to be a cop? And I was like, no. And he was like, okay, because like my one advice for you is if you're going to be a cop, then you need to just drop out because you're wasting your time. And I was like, yeah, because I feel like police officers need to have some sort of academic background.
Mandy just shared, I think there needs to be a higher level of accountability when an officer messes up. I agree. I think that needs to happen at higher levels, though, not just police officer levels. Amanda, you have your hand up, or are you just clapping? So I do want to call on Amanda and Chaz. You met a lieutenant, which is fairly high up the chain. Tell me about this guy.
The one that made all the weird comments?
No, the good one.
Oh, with the movie.
Yes. Actually, literally a good guy at a really high level.
I know that Chaz remembered that you said that he was an officer, but I didn't. So I didn't even know until he said it. Like he was like, when he was talking about the alcohol, he was like, well, that's who I work with. And I was like, oh, you're a bartender? Like what? He was like, no, I'm a police officer. I was like, oh,
he's a
weird.
lieutenant.
I would have never guessed. Like it was surprising to me. So the biases and the stigmas I have, because the whole authority thing with me, I didn't even notice, and it was actually pretty nice.
Yeah, he's super, super nice guy. Does not come off or like present as the stereotypical police officer. Not even close to what Assistant Chief Duran. He looks like a police officer.
Yeah, for sure. The buzz cut, it was weird. But the other guy, he was so nice. Ben. He was awesome.
Chaz, do you want to pipe in and say something about Ben?
I guess for me, like, because we had a conversation about it, and I was like, wow, he seems really cool. And I remember being like, well, he also has a lot that he still needs to learn. And so even, so I think that can be applicable to anybody, you know, like we're constantly learning, we're constantly figuring things out. So you can be woke, but you can still have things that you're not necessarily woke in. But I think it's still having the understanding of like, this is happening. I might not know everything about it, but I want to change it, kind of a thing. Because I remember
he absolutely has that perspective. He's always like, Angie, will you look at this for me? Will you help me with auditions and help me pick a good actress and help me, you know? And he's not a weird, creepy dude. He legitimately every day wants to learn something new to make things better.
And I think that that's one of the most important things in regards to, you know, I mean, anything is just like being willing to know that you don't know everything and take a step back and say, can you teach me this? Can we have a conversation that I can potentially learn something?
That's a lesson for everybody, right? Yeah.
One comment I definitely had about like how going forward this could be better is just like, I mean, I think there needs to be more trauma informed with police officers in general, but like definitely in this for them to like acknowledge and for it to be a conversation within the police force about how much corruption it is and like how that may affect victims, like why that could be so traumatizing for a victim if like a police officer was like a buyer or something like that. Like if they see them, they're like, a lot of them aren't going to want to come forward in general, but like they're definitely not going to want to come forward if they like know that the police are somehow involved in that arena. So just being aware of like trauma informed with how victims might not want to come forward or how they might respond if they're like suspicious of a police officer being corrupt. And just like being willing to have that conversation that like even though we're all cops, like there's still definitely corruption and like it doesn't mean that we're all the good guys.
Yeah. I think the really hard piece is you guys, the chat is exploding. I love it. The really hard piece I think is thinking about there's good cops and like John, gonna go into law enforcement, good guy, right? Rob, good guy. Ben, good guy. And at the same time, like if you have a corrupt leader, it's real hard to make change from the bottom up. I mean, just in any organization, if your leader is corrupt, you need a new leader, right?
And that's what I was thinking. I was like, honestly, someone just needs to redo the whole thing. And then I was like, well, who's going to do that for a state police department or like for a city police department? State police department, well, they're pretty corrupt too. And then, well, who's going to hold them accountable? And then it's like, oh, the federal government's pretty corrupt as well. So I think it's going to be a long time until that actually happens. And I don't think anyone's ready for any of that yet. So
Ben gives me so much hope because he's a lieutenant, which is pretty high up the food chain. And I also honestly think that the the Fort Collins police Chief Swoboda, I think he means well. I honestly do. I've met him. I was on his radio show. I think he means well. I just think he's got to get people in the chain out. They need to retire and they need to stop buying human beings. I don't know, just as an example. So I think there's hope, and I love all of the suggestions that they all need to take social classes. Thank you for coming to Marissa's TED Talk. By the way, when Amanda said the weird guy that made the weird comments, that was Assistant Chief Duran talking about how he had a minority. That's, I think, what she was, right?
Remember when he walked out and told Bree, like, oh, where's your mom?
Yeah.
Talking about you, and then, like, he asked me, I told him how, like, my mom was in the Navy and how, like, she was a Navy nurse, and he was like, oh, yeah. I was like, I could never do it. Like, I'm not nurse person, and he was like, yeah, I like my bodies dead. It's easier to deal with them when they're dead. Yes.
Oh,
I was like, how is a police chief saying this right now? That's so weird. Like, you can't say that.
think about the power that a leader has. So he's the assistant, right? So think about if Swoboda like cracked down on him, he wouldn't have a choice, because the chain of command in a police department is incredibly, like, you have to fucking listen to the person ahead of you. Like, that's who you listen to. There is no negotiating. You listen to what they tell you to do, right? And so all it would take is plopping a new leader down into that chain, and everything could absolutely change. So Ben for sergeant, or no, not sergeant, I'm sorry, Ben for chief. Oh, here we go, John. I think part of the problem might also be the lack of connection with the average citizen, the way the police are not. Yes, I totally agree. Yeah, that's 100%. I love this class. All right, what else we got here? Talked about that, talked about the findings. Oh, so the basic findings should not have been surprising from this article. Countries that are more exposed to police corruption experience increased outflow of traffic victims. Shouldn't be surprising. Countries that had an increased outflow of traffic victims experienced higher unemployment rates among women, had a denser population, so more people living there. And the freedom of movement / migration possibilities were higher. So people were able to migrate in and out of these spaces fairly freely. It wasn't like communist China, as one example. So here's the $1 million question. How do we translate this information to the people from this police corruption article without pissing them off? How do you do that? They're not reading journal articles, although I will say there are absolutely police officers who email me regularly and ask, like, what's new in the literature, Angie? And I'm like, this is the best day of my life. Let me just tell you what's new. But how do we do it?
I feel like that's hard because you literally had a meeting with a bunch of people outlining and saying, here's the evidence and here's the facts. And then you just had someone come in and undermine everything you just said. So, like,
you were there, you saw it all happen.
It was so easy to listen to. It was so easy to follow. It was made for the average person, and that's awesome. But then you just have someone come and say, like, oh, it's don't listen to it. It doesn't happen as often as she literally just proved it did. So, like, I don't know. I feel like I would say sit everyone down, have conversations, but then again, you have people like that. So
I also think, like, it's a little bit scary too, because if you were to sit down with like some of these corrupt people, like almost saying what we know they're doing could be more dangerous, because they could end up being more like corrupt or more sneaky, I almost feel like, in a sense, because if they end up being like, oh, well, you know, this is how we do it, or this is what we do, or whatnot, like, I just think that could end up kind of backfiring. So I don't have necessarily a solution. I just think that, you know, because you don't know who you're educating, like, or telling this information to, and they might just take that and use that to make that their system of corruption even better.
Mm-hmm.
So I almost feel like, in a way, it needs to start from the bottom up,
really,
instead of top down, because like the lower levels of corruption, or the people that kind of just fall into it, I feel like you could educate them more, because they also like don't have as much say. Like, it will just be a slower process, but I think that would almost be like the better approach to it.
Because they can do little things on a daily basis that are not, like Rob, if he came across a trafficking situation, he would do the right thing. And he's just a measly police officer. Is that what you're saying?
I also think, like, the people at the top, they probably profit and benefit the most from it.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously I think they'll be less likely to want to change.
Sure.
Versus the people at the bottom, they're like, well, I'm not really like getting the profit from this. So I think that like, it'd be easier to kind of educate them and like get them to change.
Yeah, I think you're right. Wherever the stakes are the highest, right? As long as the police on the lower level aren't taking those bribes. Yeah. I should try to bribe Rob and see what happens.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you think that this could potentially be like helpful if we started things on like a social level, and then it got to the police. So if we made it a bigger deal to people who are in the communities, there would be more pressure on police to then not take this not seriously.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you asked that, Chas, because because it reminded me. So I had lunch with Rob and Megan and Daniel. I guess it was 2 weeks ago. Feels like a year ago now. And so here's a really interesting piece of information. I know this is Cora. Cora, say hi.
Hi. Hi, Cora.
Say hi, Chaz. Where's your cow costume?
I know I'm not at home. I'll wear it next time for you.
I think Tuesday needs to be Halloween costume day. We're gonna wear Halloween costumes for class. Do you want to participate? Yeah. Okay. So we had lunch, and Rob let us know that Assistant Chief Duran, the guy that said he prefers dead bodies, called Rob's wife's sergeant and said, yeah, the city council is really breathing down our neck about this, because the police department reports to the city council. And the city council is really breathing down our neck about this, and we don't really actually think that there's actually a problem. And Rob's wife's sergeant was like, are you fucking kidding me? Yes, there's a huge fucking problem, and like just went ape shit on him. And he's like, whoa, what, really? And so now they're thinking about doing another op. And get this, Chaz, you ready for this? Rob's sergeant went up to him and he's like, do you think Angie and Megan would come help? After what you did to me? Are you kidding me right now? You think I want to help you? Oh. So city council can pressure police departments and can force them to go through trainings. And Amani just posted, you talk about ethics training and should be integrated into initial training. And then constantly, I agree. And on June 6th, Ben invited Megan and I to come, not June 6th, June 16th, to come and do training with all of their new deputies at the sheriff's office. So if you can make connections with somebody at the top, they'll make sure that these new folks are being trained. And if you can put pressure on city council, they'll put pressure on the police department, and it'll eventually happen if enough people in that jurisdiction are like, yeah, actually this is a problem, dickweed. And so he had his ass handed to him, which made my whole day. So there's hope.
You scared the dog. You clapped and your dog like.
Oh, Betty White.
Yeah, you scared her.
Betty White's like, listen, I'm trying to live my life right here.
Oh, she's cute.
She needs a bath.
It's okay. It's hard times for everyone nowadays.
I know. All right, folks, any final questions about today? I can't believe we took this long, but that's fine.
I have a few questions, maybe not necessarily regarded to everything that's happened in today's discussion, but still about our class in general. I don't know if I should wait to ask those or if I should ask them meow.
Are they relevant to you or to everybody?
I think that they could potentially be relevant to everybody if people are having conversations about these issues.
Yeah.
Okay. So yesterday I had this conversation with my cousin's new boyfriend. Okay. Let me just say, awkward. But anyways, so one of my questions is, he was arguing that, and I said I don't know enough about it to be able to say that you're right or wrong. Are there, and I don't think that he was right, so that's why I'm asking, but are there more women pimps than there are men pimps?
No.
Okay.
No.
That's what I thought. I was like, I said that, and he's like, yes, there are. And I was like, I don't think
a lot of time it feels
about.
like, isn't it a lot of time it feels like women, there's more women pimps, because that's who, I don't remember the name of them, but like the second in command, that's who ends up getting like prostitutes and stuff more. Yeah, that's who ends up being like, takes the fall for everything basically, but she's still being trafficked, right? Even though she's like,
yep.
So that's probably why people like.
No, I'll tell you why. People see something that is, they experience cognitive dissonance. They see a female pimp or they hear about a female pimp and all of a sudden they're like, wow, they're everywhere, right? I mean, you see something that's odd and you're like, they do exist. I have a black friend. It's a psychological concept. I cannot remember what it's called. It's not cognitive dissonance, but it's when you see something that's odd and you take note of it and you automatically think, oh yeah, well, there's more of those than we really realize. Actually, buddy, So good question. Answer is no.
Yeah, and his argument was that like he was basically like taking everything and putting it on women and being like the supply is the problem, like men aren't the problem, like men who purchase sex are not the problem is like the supplier. And I was like, that is wrong. I was like, I was like fisting my hand, and like I like had like these bruises right here. And I was like, I don't think that that's right. And then we were also talking about like then we watched that movie, what's it called? Hustle?
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's seen it, but then he's like, see, I told you. See, I told you. I told you. And I was like, this is not a representation. Like, this is not, I was like, and I kept saying, where are the statistics? Where are the statistics? And he's like, I'll pull some up for you. And I said, please do. I'll send them to my group chats. We'll make fun of them. It'll be an amazing time.
Maybe we need to send him the link to our, Rachel, that's exactly right. They say short skirts are the problem. It's true.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we need to publish this on YouTube and be like, listen up, friends, listen up.
Well,
I don't know if I want him in here. He might mess everything up. We got a good day.
Honestly, he's just in the next room. I could go look his ass up. It doesn't bother me.
For police chief. Gross. I'd rather eat my toenails.
Well, and I think it can be applicable in regards to slightly what we're talking about, because I think that there's just like a misunderstanding about this issue overall. And police are people too, you know, and
absolutely, and they are exposed to so much trauma.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And so if we have a lot of people who are already not understanding of what is happening, then I feel like obviously our police are going to be not understanding of what's happening either.
It'll happen. I mean, just think about how much things have changed over the last like 5 years. When I think about it, I don't know how locked in or tuned in you guys are to how police do things, but like just the fact that I'm invited to come and do a training, like a professor is invited, like it's changing. It'll just take some time. I'll be police chief when I retire. Sounds like a good gig. Good questions, Chaz. Stay engaged and report back. I want to hear more of these conversation tidbits.
I don't want to do it. I was like not with it. We were on a walk last night, and like he just like kept interrupting me, and I was like, I'm about to fucking smack your face. Shut your mouth. Where's Angie when I need her? Honestly.
Right here.
I know. I should have you guys FaceTime.
Yeah.
Honestly, I bet you he'd like it too. I will. I'll set it up.
Right. Let me just make sure it's happy hour.
Well, I don't know how that'll be for quarantine, but yeah. Happy hour.
I'll be drunk. No, that's it's my happy hour. Because
Okay. Me too.
Oh,
I heard someone compare this pandemic to the being in Vegas. That you don't know what time it is. You're always drunk.
Seriously.
And something else, but
every hour is happy hour. I know, except I have to do all these Zoom meetings. Like I'm literally in this office all the time. Are you guys doing live Zoom classes for your other classes, or they all just moved to straight online?
Your 2 classes that I have with you are my only 2. Like the rest are just like typical online classes. They like transferred, but
that's such a bummer. I feel like we kept the momentum going, y'all. I'm so excited right now.
Oh, Rogelio?
I know Rogelio logged in. I know.
Oh, so because this is the same like key for the theory class, huh?
Well, you know, he's writing his paper about sex trafficking. So Rogelio, feel free to, if you want to hop on at 8 a.m. and get some free class. Look at him. Hi, Rogelio.
Hey.
And honestly, he's smart as fuck, y'all. Let me just throw that out there.
I know. We start at 8 a.m., Rogelio. Feel free to log on.
Like, I only have like 15 minutes between this class and the next one, so I have to walk my dogs.
Okay, I should. Oh my God, it's 9:16. Okay, so Halloween costumes on Tuesday, and read the Barbara Brent's article, and we'll do the same thing. Let's try like 8:30. I think 8:30 will be fine. We had a lot of like structural announcements to go over today, and yes, it'll be the same class ID. Let's do 8:30 on Tuesday. I don't think we're gonna need the entire time. We just had so much to talk about and get caught up on. So deal?
Deal.
Happy Halloween, y'all. See you on Tuesday.
See you on Tuesday. We'll see you in like 10 minutes.
Okay.
How do I leave?
Well, you don't have to leave. Stay here.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
Yeah, for our next one, we are just like sliding up into it, so we could just stay on for that.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop the recording though.